So,
Hello.
back.
We're back.
Back again. Back again for another installment of physical education.
Somebody was asking me what this is
it's called now. I don't know. Physical education was a more catch-all whatever, and now physical education podcast edition, hybrid edition.
I've been saying I'm just a recurring guest.
the only
consistent guest.
recurring guest. Like, at what point does the recurring guest become the co-host?
Yeah. Probably after more than 3 episodes.
I'll send the contract to your people.
Send it to my agent.
Yeah. All right. So today, what we're talking about is HYROX training, right?
Yeah.
And about your experiences and your education of what works to train for HYROX and what doesn't. Well, and by doesn't, like most of the things we do in training, right? It probably does a little bit, but right, it's like what is the most effective use of your time? What is a much less effective use of your time? Right?
Yeah, I think people often think like, oh man, I'm training for HYROX. And I wouldn't say that that's how I would describe the training protocols that they're doing. It doesn't mean that they won't help somewhat for HYROX, but they might not be like, you're putting a lot of cognitive effort forth in trying to improve this one particular thing. And maybe that's not the way that I would recommend going about it.
Yeah, and let's set the stage a little, right? And some of these opening points, like I think something to, keep in mind for people, right? And I think something that's interesting is like HYROX, especially when it first started, right, was this idea of like, well, there are these people, they like to run, they like to like go to the gym and lift a little bit. What's something that kind of like they can do if they're doing those things, and maybe they don't have to be doing tons of like specific practice. Mm-hmm. I think it's evolved a little from that. And again, it's like, yes, you could train very non-specifically and do a HYROX. That doesn't mean that you are training for it.
Correct.
By doing so.
Correct.
So yeah, let's set that scene a little bit. What are some things that you think are like important for people to understand before we even get into things?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the big thing to understand is that, you sign up for a HYROX and it's fun, it's cool, there's a lot of like things happening. I think it's awesome, like how popular it has become, but it's important not to forget that like it is a sport. It is an athletic event. It's, it's a competition regardless of how competitively you treat it. And so if you're training for something, right, it makes sense to train like an athlete trains for a sport, right? We don't want to train to just, maybe you do, but maybe your goals shouldn't be just to survive something, but we want to outperform, right? We want to do things and train in a way that gives you an opportunity to showcase your best self, not just get you to the finish line. And I think that's where like there's some kind of maybe miscalculation on some people's part is like what you're actually trying to do there, right? And so I think like understanding that like this is an athletic event and your goal shouldn't just be to survive it, right? Your goal should be to perform it as best as you are possibly capable in the time frame that you're able to, allot it, right? And I think that that's like an important distinction. And, on that note, you've got to be able to identify like the specific demands of the sport. You know what I mean? And that's how I would think about structuring your training, not just like what does a HYROX feel like, but like what are the actual components that make up a good HYROXer, and how do I build those up?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, thinking about it as somebody maybe who's never done one before, right? I would say most people probably want to do a little bit more than just survive.
Yeah.
Right. I do think there is some, element of like maybe the first time you do it, you're kind of, you want to participate and feel it out and understand it a little bit. I think it is, I guess, different in some ways than like, when people like run a marathon, and maybe because like something like a marathon, 3 hours. Yes, my 3-hour marathon. 4, 5 hours, something, is such a feat. The whole like the first person who ran a marathon died joke kind of thing, that like maybe doing that is in and of itself is like, yeah, you did it. Even if you ran and walked and this and that, you got through it. Mm-hmm. But I do think like HYROX, hour and a half-ish, maybe a little longer than that, is something that it's like, right, the purpose is not just get through it. You can get through it. Most people can get through it in some capacity, and it's to get through it in a way that feels like good. You feel good about yourself. You feel good afterwards. And, you know, especially as you know, if you're going to do it again or even the first time, like having some performance goals. So let's talk about a little about like,
Yeah.
you know, the demands of the sport, right? If we're thinking about how am I going to do, you know, my best and, you know, my best this, you know, on this next one or whatever it is, like what are the specific things that we are looking to build and train and pay attention to
Yeah.
as I you know prep for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably like three or four, let's call it four main demands, you know, and number one is just like you were talking about, and I think this is like the comparison to marathon, half marathon, whatever, but you just have to be able to move consistently for the time domain that you're going to be out on the floor. And you have to have the aerobic base that's going to support that, right? So you need to be able to move consistently and produce at least some, you know, probably a reasonable level of output for a really long period of time. That might be, you know, an hour to an hour and 10 minutes if you're on the faster side. That might be an hour and a half. It might be somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours if this is your first time and you're kind of like couch to HYROX sort of thing, right? And so we need to be prepared to be consistently moving forward throughout that time, right? So that's really important, right? First thing and foremost, we have to be prepared to move for that period of time. Second thing is you have to have a requisite. I'm not going to say you have to be super strong, but you have to have a requisite level of strength. And what I mean by a requisite level of strength is you have to be able to move the sled. You know what I mean? The sled needs to be a low enough percentage of your maximal force production that you can move it in a way that doesn't require every ounce of force that you have, right? Because that's, you know, doing it like 1 rep max style is going to take you much longer.
It's also fairly early in the race.
And it's fairly early in the race. So if you're not, you know, the sleds, and I mean, you know, even things like burpees, right? I think burpees are a good one, right? If you haven't developed that kind of upper body pressing strength and doing one kind of burpee off the ground and the speed of it is close enough to your kind of max capacity of strength, that's really going to inhibit point number 3, which is more muscular endurance, right? So you have to have the requisite level of strength just to be able to you know, sit at the table. You know what I mean? You have to be able to move the things. And then we want to be able to move the things in a way that resists as much as possible fatigue in those movement patterns. So that's going to be your lunges, your wall balls, your burpees. You know, yeah, really all of the stations are going to require some form of muscular endurance. And when we say muscular endurance, and just meaning like that your muscles can do the same thing over and over again and resist fatigue in that process. It doesn't mean that they have to be crazy, crazy strong, right? You just have to be strong enough and enduring enough to do the thing that you have to do over and over without letting those movement patterns go away. So that's number 3. And I guess the fourth thing, and this really is where we got to get into performance, is on top of just the aerobic endurance, we want to be able to operate at as close to our maximal aerobic output for as long a period of time as we can without kind of tipping over into that red line feeling where you start seeing stars and production goes downhill. And I would call that like our threshold capacity, right? How long can we ride that threshold before tipping over into that red line? So it's like, if those are the 4 things that you're thinking about training, and it's like, how would I go about training those things specifically? And then in a way where I weave them all together before the race, that's, I think, going to be the process that sets you up for success.
Yeah. And those are, I mean, I think it's a pretty interesting thing because they are somewhat unique things, right? They are some different buckets. I think they can be easy to sort of like confuse, right? To think of like, you know, maybe aerobic endurance and muscular endurance as kind of the same thing. Like, can you just keep going? And it's like, well, we're talking about 2 different things, right? We're talking about an energy system and like our actual muscle function. To think about the 2 kind of muscle functions of like, I need to be able to get the sled moving and do it sub-maximally, and I need to be able to do, you know, a shit ton of lunges or whatever. And those aren't exactly the same thing. So
they're very much not the same thing.
I mean, I ran into it, you know, firsthand when I, you know, the when I did the one in November, and like felt really good. And then
you're a strong lunger.
And I'm a strong lunger, but I'd been traveling for a month. I'd been running a lot, but my like contraction endurance was not there.
Yeah.
And it bit me hard.
And the lunges,
it was cool. I mean, it was cool to feel, you know, as somebody who thinks this stuff is like, you know, when things go wrong, I was like, whoa, I was like, what is going on? Like my body's being crazy right now.
Yeah.
And it was a good testament to the sort of like the breadth of what HYROX asks from people
Mhm.
if they want to do it. And, I did actually, like even it being my first, I had some like, ooh, okay, this is where I want to end up. This is a goal. And like, I could feel that kind of like push pull.
Yeah.
So, talking about those kind of things, right? We've sort of identified what the demands are. What are if somebody's thinking about training for it broadly, right? What do we think about? Like, what are the principles that somebody would need to put on their training to know that they are addressing all of those things?
Yeah. I think, the most important thing I think is, what we would call periodization, or structuring your prep into ways where it's like we build those four things probably like almost, I'm not going to say fully separately, but we build those things with one primary stimulus at a time. And it's really not until like we get very close to race season before we start like weaving them together. You know what I mean? And so having a structure where, okay, I'm going to take a period of time, we would call it like blocks of training. I'm going to take a block. I'm going to take an accumulation block where I'm going to accumulate volume in all four of these things, build up my overall capacity in those things. And then we can kind of turn dials of intensity and starting to put them together and experience the kind of mixed fatigue that you're going to experience the closer you get to race day. So what does that look like in practice? It probably looks like 5 to 6 weeks of accumulating, all right? And then another 5 to 6 weeks of putting those things together, and experiencing intensity a little bit more. I think, another thing that I think is important and goes along the same way is it's really important to, we always say chase adaptation, right? Or chase stimulus, not sensation, and I think we'll get to that more in a second, but, it's not about feeling a certain way, or making yourself feel like, oh man, if I just work myself into the ground every single day doing the same thing over and over, I'll get really good at this. You will get really good at suffering, you know what I mean? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you will perform better, right? You will
You will
tolerate.
get comfortable with suffering
Yes.
at your baseline shitty level, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, right?
Yes.
Like that won't, the level of your suffering is not going to change very much. Well, you're improving on sort of like your mental, emotional kind of relation to it, and very little else.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So if we want to think more of like, what do I want out of a session, not how do I want to feel during a session. So I would say that's like a really important one.
No vibes based training. Yeah.
I'm not the I think of a couple of our folks in hybrid who would much prefer things to be vibes based. That's not really how I do things now. And then I think the last point is obviously we want to progressively increase towards from like where we are today towards the demand of the sport, whether that means the total volume, right, of contraction, right, the total number of lunges that you're going to have to do at a time, the total amount of time you're going to have to be moving. We need to accumulate all of those things. And then, as we get closer, like I was saying, we need to progress the intensity, right? So it's cool to move for 60 or 70 or 80 minutes at a chill pace, but now we've got to get closer and closer to moving to 60 to 80 minutes at a hard pace, right, or at the pace that you want to run the race. And so, I run into a lot of programs where it feels like the thought process behind the program is a little bit more exposure based. Like we're just going to expose you to the things. And that works a little bit. I think, it works more in some ways than others. And I don't think endurance training is, where that style of thinking really shines. And so something that's a little bit more structured, a little bit more progressive with the kind of peaks and valleys, in terms of effort, intensity, and volume that you want.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like it's almost, it's not a misconception. Is it a misconception? I don't or what's it's like, for most people, for somebody like on the outside looking in, right? There's somebody, they haven't done a HYROX before. Maybe they've run, maybe they played some sports growing up, and maybe they go to the gym and do some, resistance training, they do machines, maybe they even lift, right? But they haven't really kind of put all the pieces together. And then they see this thing and they go like, oh, well, this looks like this. And I think often what ends up happening is that their training can almost be sort of like HYROX cosplay, right? Like their training becomes this sort of like, I need it to look like that,
Yeah.
and and feel like that and whatever. And if I do that, then it'll prepare me, right? And which is funny because it almost in some ways probably they'd be better served if they just kept running on one day and lifting on another day, right? Yeah. And it's almost like they're trying to, make a recipe or make a meal, and they're just taking all of the ingredients and they don't even like sort of like prep them separately or even like do some quality control of them separately. They just like they put them all together like in a blender. And they're like, well, I put it all together. This is eggplant and tomato sauce and whatever. Like, this is lasagna. And you're like, yeah, you can't just blend those things together and eat that. That's not going to be good, right? Like, there does need to be some, like, discrete prep of things before they're integrated.
And a discrete layering, I think, to kind of
it's the lasagna analogy.
That's actually a really good.
Wow.
It was a really good.
I picked
analogy.
Lasagna just purely out of nowhere.
Serendipitous.
Yeah, I do like the layering idea.
Yeah.
Well, so like let's talk about kind of like what do we see from people when they're doing it again. And I don't want to say like, oh, you're doing it all wrong, but they're doing it in a way where you're like leaving a lot on the table. You're probably working really hard for like less.
I think that's like the main point that I want to get.
And you can only work really hard for so long.
Yeah.
Especially today's our first like 110 degree plus day here in Texas. Like you can only sustain working that hard that many times, whatever, for a finite amount of time before like either your body or your mind or something is like, yeah, this is enough, right?
Yeah.
And if you do that and it's still 2 months to race day, you're just gonna do that for 60 more days? Like, good luck. Yeah.
It's a lot of blenders.
A lot of lasagna.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And I guess I would think about it in, there's kind of like two buckets of less than optimal training. And I want to like be very clear. And I think what you just said is very important, that it's not like these things are detrimental to training, but you are like working really hard to leave a lot of what I would say we would call adaptation, right? To leave a lot of performance gains on the table. And so like,
you're not going backwards.
You're not going backwards.
Not incrementally forwards.
For hurting a lot.
Yeah, right. For like, tons of output for very little.
And not just like suffering output, but like time, energy, resource, whatever cognitive, however you design this program, whatever.
Exposure and injury.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exposure and injuries, I think, is an important one. So anyway, those two buckets like kind of relate to intensity. I feel like there's the bucket of people who overdo intensity in HYROX training, and then there's people who underdo intensity in HYROX training. And so, in the first bucket, and we can kind of like outline the avatars a little bit, right? But in that kind of first bucket of overdoing intensity, you'll see a lot of things where like, 3 or 4 times a week, I'm doing something that looks like a HYROX, right? So like it's designed in a way that it's like running, rowing, lunge, and it's at like a lot of density of those movement contractions. And your heart rate is really, really high throughout. See a lot of like long CrossFit Metcon looking, sort of workouts.
This sounds to me like I take my regular CrossFit gym's programming and I just double it all.
And I add running in between.
Yeah, right. I just add a mile run in between every round. And it's like,
well,
that's something.
For sure. And I think, there's two things that are happening there. One is just like you said, and some people may be more sensitive to this, some people may be less sensitive depending on where you're at in your training age. But your ability to recover from those sessions is going to become less and less, right? Will it be enough to really impact your ability to train well? That depends on where you are in your kind of training age curve. But it will at some point impact your ability to like get up the next day and do something productive, even if you can't really like feel, even if you're not sensitive enough internally to be able to feel that your output is diminished, it will diminish. And so I think that's one point. The second point, and I would say this is even the more important one, is if you're trying to train everything all at once all the time, you're probably not training any of the things that you want to do optimally, right? So yeah, you're like, well, I moved for an hour and 10 minutes. I must be improving my aerobic base. But you spent 18 of those minutes at maximal heart rate, right, which is really nervous system fatiguing, and we also know like doesn't actually translate to aerobic development, right? Because your heart's just contracting too fast. It's in pure survival mode, so it's not even adapting there. The quality of your reps in movement stations, right, begins to deteriorate, and so you're not actually right. You're adding in compensations rather than driving true muscular endurance or the ability for the muscle not to get tired, because you're just changed biomechanical strategy and you're just using another muscle to get you there, right? So we haven't really like actually trained the things that we wanted to train, and I think that's like an important one. So that's kind of, you see that one like pretty often, I would say that. And I think it does. I'm a huge CrossFit fan, and I think there's a time and a place for everything. But I think one of the things that happens is, and experiencing this personally, coming from a CrossFit background, is that the primary lever we always think about in CrossFit style stuff is intensity, right? And so
I mean, they would say that.
Yeah, and it's the only lever.
Sauce.
Yeah, it's the magic sauce, and I think that works really well for GPP. And I think it works well for like short duration efforts. If you're hitting that 4 or 5 times a week, and when I say short duration, I mean less than 20 minutes. But I don't think that is optimal way to develop an aerobic engine, or really to develop like true energy system training kind of across the spectrum of energy systems, from high power to like low power, long endurance, sustained effort. So that's kind of one bucket. And then second bucket is this underdoing intensity.
I was surprised. Like, I mean, obviously, I know there are people who are.
Yeah.
There's always people who are underdoing it. But like, this one was more surprising to me. I guess probably because I'm more, used to people just like overdosing it.
This comes a lot from people who are more from the endurance background, right? Where, and maybe not like even highly trained endurance background, but have just like, I've enjoyed running, and I've slowly built up. I'm a casual runner, and I've slowly built up from 5 miles a week to 20 miles a week. I've avoided the injury pitfalls, but I've never really followed a structured running program. I've just kind of run as much as I like to.
Run 3 or 4 days a week.
Yep.
Some decent mileage, but like,
at a smooth pace. Yeah,
it's like, I mean, again,
and you will get real aerobic development from that.
Right.
Yeah, that is a real thing. So those people have like probably got the aerobic development piece down, and then they've at some point they've probably seen an Instagram influencer talk about hybrid, and do your zone 2 this and your zone 2 cross training, and then your your lifting days at the gym that are more maybe aesthetic focused or hypertrophy or bodybuilding focused. And this is kind of the conflation problem that you were talking about earlier. We're thinking that like, okay, I run, I lift, HYROX is running and lifting, so good to go, and while I would say if you've experienced what it feels like to, take a set of squats to failure, that certainly is going to create a sensation, but it's not the adaptation that we want for HYROX, right? Because you're operating at a much higher percentage weight, and it's just not going to translate to doing 100 reps of a lighter load in the way that it's going to translate to quad development or some of the other things that you're actually getting from that stimulus, right? And so when you put all those things together on race day, it's not going to feel super great. And I think the other thing there is, you're not, the experience of combining those things together is going to create such a novel experience of fatigue for your body that will not be fun to experience that for the first time on race day.
Yeah, I think it kind of misses the like, often misses. I mean, that like, maybe this isn't a model anymore, but the classic hybrid model of like, I lift one day, I run another day, right? It sort of is like, and the mixed modal twain shall never meet, right? Like, we're never doing those things together, and that is different. And I do think often, especially with that kind of like aesthetically focused or driven focus, the movements that you do in HYROX are not aesthetic. They're not aesthetic crowd pleasers, right? They are mainly, what we would call functional, strength movements, things like that. So that if you never touch those, right, if you never kind of like integrate those, whether it's, on a lifting day, just doing, lunges versus, hack squats in a machine or something like that. Or, even more so like putting it together in the whole eventually. Right. I think, it sounds like a good way to leave some stuff.
And I think people don't believe that. You know, I think that's like easy for us to be here talking and somebody's listening and they're like, yeah, man, whatever. Like I do the leg press machine and my legs are freaking strong. And I want to be clear that like I am not arguing the fact that in that example your legs are strong, dude. Like they are legitimately the contractile potential
and there will be carryover.
There will be carryover, but what you're not getting from that, and I think kind of goes not talked about as much, is you're not getting the sequencing effect of the function, right? That's the part that's like, why is it different from doing it free weight versus doing it on a machine? And it's because your brain doesn't know how to sequence the firing of muscles to be able to do that movement more efficiently, so that you're not overworking. So it's like once you go from a machine to doing those lunges with a sandbag on your back, and now you have to do all the stabilizing, the effort that you're going to put into that low level of weight is going to be much, much more than if you've put the reps in to kind of, so your brain has learned how to sequence that process better.
I think about it a lot of like the Venn diagram example, right? And it's like, yes, like you have been doing this thing and there is overlap of those circles, right? Your leg press will overlap with the wall ball, with the, you know, pushing the sled, with lunging, whatever. Yes, there will be overlap. But the goal is to try to get that overlap as overlapped as possible, right? We want those, will this come through on the camera, right? My two circles, are my two circles a little overlapped, or like, am I really getting, and it's probably unfair to say we'll ever get them perfectly overlapped, right? But
I mean, I think that's like the effort of like Elite 15, tip of the spear.
Right, but like the goal is we're trying to get like, you know, as much overlap as possible. We're trying to get that our training has as much of the sort of like different elements and things like that in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is progressive, to make sure that like, you know, day of, there aren't like there's not novel stimulus, you know, and like certainly as my legs started cramping on lunges, which was novel stimulus. I've done fitness for a long time and I've never had that happen. That was not me. I was interested in it, but I wasn't like, wow, really executing the plan here. That was like, something has gone wrong. I should not be finding novel stimulus an hour into this race. It's probably I'm too tired for novelty right now.
So, I think just for folks, like, we use novel stimulus a lot and we kind of throw that around. And that is really just a fancy way of saying, something you know, new. A stress that your body hasn't felt before. Right. And so, it's not any more complicated than that.
Yeah. You don't want any surprises on race day. Right. And I think like, you know, one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that you do, you know, with hybrid here, with your athletes, is, you know, your job, and I think the way you see your responsibility as the coach is to make sure that by the time people get there, that there aren't, you know, novel stimuluses, there aren't surprises. They are pretty well prepared. So like, you know, how do you do that? Like, how do you take somebody who, you know, maybe they've never done this before? Like, you know, we've had some people who it's like, maybe it's not their first time ever exercising, but certainly like exercising with any like real intention, or some people who've done a lot of stuff, but maybe it's been in one of these, like, you know, in a CrossFit setting, in a setting that like, despite having a lot of tools, the application has been so different that they require like almost some like reprogramming. Like, what, you know, what's your approach for like how the program looks like? And then why don't we talk about this, like, you know, the prep cohort and how like specifically this lead in to Dallas in November is going to look like.
Lot there. I mean, I think, first off, I hate surprises. I hate surprises.
That is not surprising to me.
In every way possible. I hate it so much that I don't want my athletes to experience them either, you know, whether it's birthday parties or HYROX. I genuinely hate surprises, especially in fitness. And, you know, I think to answer that question, like most directly, what do we do is, well, we've had a program, right? And we'll talk about the prep cohort and kind of how that fits in a second, but we've got a program that gradually increases the exposure to the specificity that you're going to feel on race day. And so to think like, oh, you know, I had this chat with somebody the other day who's signed up for a HYROX, and I think signed up for their first one. and is like, oh, I've got like lunging has given me problems before. I tend to avoid lunging because of my knee. So I think I'm just going to start by like doing, the sandbag, and I'll start at like 20 meters, and then I'll do 30 meters, and we got to get this weekly buildup. And I'm like, that's great that you're even thinking that way. But even better, right, would be let's lunge for strength first, right? Like let's even take the conditioning component out of it, and let's make sure you have that requisite level of strength, joint stability, all of that sort of stuff. If lunging is something that you're kind of putting back onto the table, let's do it in a strength format first, build up that requisite strength, and then we'll turn that requisite strength into the muscular endurance component that you need. And he was like, oh wow, like that's a really...
I don't just have to start doing, what's the distance in HYROX, like
100
meters?
Yeah.
Right? I don't just do 100 meters of lunges every day until HYROX.
Yeah.
It's like, nah, you don't have to do that.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think, I heard some elite 15er, this blew my mind, but she didn't do great on the wall balls or something one time. And so she just did 100
wall balls
every day. No, literally. She was like, for 3 months, I did 100 wall balls every day. And I'm like, that's not how I would recommend going. Yeah, good for you. That's not how I would recommend going about it. But the point being is it's the gradual exposure to these things, both from an energy system standpoint, from a muscular and a pattern standpoint, right? So if somebody's never done wall balls before, I wouldn't be like, okay, well, we need to start at 10 wall balls today. I'd probably start at some other version of a squat pattern.
Yeah, we're going to squat.
Yeah.
I thought that's what you were going to say about lunging. I thought you were going to say we don't even have to lunge yet, right? We're going to build up some of the things that have given you trouble in the past, right? Oh, like deep knee flexion hurts or this or that, whatever. We're going to expose that, and then we're going to build to a strength-based lunge, and then we're going to put like some conditioning kind of like tune on it. But,
yeah, I mean, I think that's if we're going as broad as you can, like that's the general. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So that's like the general progression. It's like, let's look at the pattern,
right?
Then the pattern with strength, then requisite strength with conditioning or muscular endurance. How
integrating it into like the other movements.
Exactly. So that's like kind of the structure. And I would say we do that both from a physiological standpoint and from, I'm big on like actual race preparation, right? I want people to know, like, they're not getting on that rower. Guys, if you jump on that rower and you don't know what pace you're about to run, no, I'm kidding. But like, I think it's a failure on my part if somebody from our crew jumps on that rower and has no good idea.
I'm going to see how
I'm going to see how I feel, right? Like, no, we have practiced that pace, right? And we've practiced it. And I use the word practice as different from training it, right? We've trained it too, but we've also practiced that pace. And so I don't like surprises in kind of any event. So it's like, you should have a plan as to how you're going to do things, kind of a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. We're not going to over engineer it. If you're like, yeah, I'm just going out there to have fun, but you should have like an understanding of like, okay, here's what can go right and here's what can go wrong. And here's what I do in different situations, all the way down to the folks are going to laugh, but rope management on the sleds is like my pet peeve, right? And what do you do with the rope when you sled pull it? And we practice that, and we practice it because it makes a difference. And it's the difference between falling on your face and embarrassing yourself in front of, your friends and whoever else, right? And nothing to be embarrassed about, right? You're out there, you're doing it. But that is a controllable that we can control for, and we should. So that's kind of like my spiel on the big picture. But
I do think it's a good thing to highlight. I think some people sometimes confuse, I'm going to do this and have fun, with like, I'm going to be prepared. They think that, hey, I'm going to go and I'm just going to row and I'm just going to kind of see how I feel, see what happens, whatever, that's going to be fun. But I actually think that people tend to have fun when they feel prepared, right? People tend to have fun when they feel like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I have a goal that I know, like, that I can hit, and then I hit it, like I executed on my plan. I think for most people that is actually very fun.
I think uncertainty is like the worst.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like, and I think often, I mean, this is for a different podcast about, our defense mechanisms and things like that. Often that kind of like YOLO sort of style is a defense mechanism, is this sort of like, I don't think I'm going to do that great, so I'm just going to kind of like not attach any sort of like structure to this. And then sure, I mean, then if I don't do great, then, how would I, right? But I do actually think that people tend to have better experiences and a better time when there's some like kind of understanding, structure, execution involved, and provided it goes well, which, I think most of the time it should. If we put in the work, it should go
Yeah,
well.
I mean, yeah, that's my job, right?
Yeah.
Is to, you know, not everyone is going to become an elite 15
Right.
HYROXer, but everyone, and I mean literally everyone, should be able to set a goal that is within their reach, but is ahead of where they're at today, and go out and run a race that they're proud of for executing it exactly the way that they have worked hard to do over a period of time. And I would say that, if you come through our program, and maybe this is a good segue to the cohort, but if you come through our program and like what we're doing at Hybrid here at Lumos, you're not going to show up on race day. I mean, it would be impossible unless you just don't come to our training sessions. But if you come to all of our training sessions, it will be impossible for you to show up on race day and not have an expectation for how everything is going to feel, how you should be practicing those things, and what that day is going to feel like, and what your plan is going into that. Like, it would be impossible not
Regardless of your fitness,
regardless of your fitness.
That's the thing that I've seen with the folks in the program that I like most appreciate, and I think it's really cool, is like across a broad level of fitness and conditioning levels, pro and open division, just like, and almost like an hour difference in their finish time, but like the application and the sort of expectation is the same across all those people, right? The same kind of like, focus, but also just understanding of like, okay, I want to do this and I want to do this, and here's the part that I know I need to like really pay attention to. And like everybody has seemed to like have that going in. It has nothing to do with where they're going to finish, right? And it's just from like that preparatory phase. So yeah, why don't we talk more about like specifically what that looks like, specifically what the prep cohort looks like from like a nuts and bolts standpoint.
Yeah. So we're going to do, what we're calling the Lumos HYROX Dallas prep cohort. And that's going to be a bracketed program inside of our hybrid conditioning program, where whether you're a current Lumos member or not, you are welcome to join us for 10 weeks. And we will have a separate program, a separate structure for that. So that would start the week of September 14th. And that's going to give us 10 weeks to get folks prepared specifically for HYROX Dallas, the third weekend in November. It's the weekend right before Thanksgiving. So especially if you're somebody who, is kind of liking what you're hearing, you've already signed up for Dallas, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't know that I've got, all the tools in place. I've kind of got my ChatGPT, I've got my kind of lifting and running splits that I've kind of been hanging on to, but these guys are making like a decent point that maybe that's not going to get me as far as I thought that it would. This is going to be a really good program, both for preparing you for this race and teaching you how to prepare for future races. And so that's going to start on September 14th and work all the way until Dallas HYROX. It includes 5 sessions a week. So the way that we structure our training is we'll do 2 strength specific sessions a week. As we get closer to the race, those sessions will be less about building strength and more about maintaining strength and supporting the other conditioning work that we're going to do, which I think is an important part that we don't really have time to get into the nuts and bolts on today, but that strength work can be supportive of these other things. And so as we get closer, that's what our strength days will look like. We do 1 running session, running only, and that's where we'll kind of prepare some of these paces and get our kind of threshold work done. We do 1 kind of interval capacity session that's structured and becomes increasingly specific towards the movements of HYROX. And then we have 1 what we call simulation session a week. And that's a 90-minute workout where we build closer and closer and closer to the full demand of what a HYROX is going to feel like. And so that kind of very much feels like, okay, I run, then I do some sled, I run, then I do some lunges, I run, then I do wall balls, right? And that's kind of where we start weaving all of this stuff together. So the attitude and the principles of the program follow exactly all the things that we just talked about, right? The gradual exposure, increasing frequency, progressing both energy systems and the muscles, the musculoskeletal system to be prepared for that race.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things, I think the cool thing about HYROX, the race, and then it sort of like backwards, goes into the way that you train for it, is like, what it's going to be, right? It, like, and I think often, we both come from sort of the CrossFit world, right? Like, that training necessarily is different because of this concept that like if you competed or if you whatever, you don't know what that's going to be. So it has to be sort of like broader and less specific. But because we know what this is going to be, we can sort of reverse engineer it, right? And I think that's a really cool thing in that like, you know if you're going to push a sled, you know how much is on it, and you know that by the time you've gone through the prep cohort, like that sled will feel doable, very doable for you, right? It will not be that one rep max effort early in the race that kind of like leaves you smoke for the rest of it, right? Like we know how long it's going to take. We know how long we need to be able to sustain things. And so like we will train to make sure that by that time, going for an hour and a half or plus, right? Like is not outside of your realm. And I think like, I guess the point that, or something that like, when we're talking to like who this might be, right? If you are somebody who's never trained for something with some specificity, right? If you're used to this sort of like, and this is, I've done this for years, this kind of like, model of like, yeah, I'm generally ready for things and I can play a sport and I can do this and I go on a hike or whatever, right? But if you've never trained with like some specificity for something and really kind of like played around really tightening all the screws, like I think you owe it to yourself to try it. I think you do a great job of it. And like, I think like people tend to really get a lot out of that, whether they do more HYROXs after, or whether they just kind of take that mindset to other things they do about like what good preparation looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, do you want to train for something or do you want to test it?
Right.
And it kind of comes down to that difference. And I obviously love training. This is what I do all day, every day. So I love the process of it for myself and for, the athletes, in our facility. But yeah, if the experience of training for something is what I genuinely find it a really fun and rewarding process to, so you get to race day and you feel like you've already accomplished something, right? Like it kind of removes this, I think for a lot of people, it removes this kind of, oh man, like, what's going to happen on race day, and it's like, it makes it so that we've already like accomplished something, like you've already done like a huge level of preparation, and that's something to feel proud of and feel good about in and of itself before you even kind of step into the corral and hear the Chicago Bulls theme song. That's the opening for every
it's hype, man.
It is awesome.
Is that there's some joke video about the guy composing that. I can't remember who it is. I gotta find it. Put it at the end of this. So
yeah. But all that said, I guess we will.
John Tesh. It's John Tesh. And
Okay.
there's some joke video about him composing that. So.
But we will put a link to the cohort, I guess, in the description here.
Yeah, I mean, if you're watching this and you are either somebody who does some fitness stuff but doesn't do this specifically and is interested, if you're a member or somebody in our orbit and somebody who like, oh man, this person, they run a lot, or they signed up for, certainly if they signed up for HYROX Dallas,
Absolutely,
send it their way. There'll be a link to sign up for the cohort specifically to, get more information. I think you do a lot of, coaching and training for folks who are doing this outside of just the cohort. So, you work with some people who may have like special case stuff going on where, you help them with that, still with the intention of running a HYROX, whether it's Dallas or down the road. So there's a number of ways to do that. Or even if you're like, man, I'd like to run a HYROX, there's no way I'm going to be ready by Dallas, but maybe, the next one, Houston in the, in the winter or something like that, like, drop a line.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you feel like you fall into that category, I guess it's also worth plugging too that we're going to be doing a HYROX Learn and Assess event here Sunday, August 30th. So that'll be 2 weeks kind of before the cohort officially starts, where we'll do the HYROX conditioning test, and also kind of be talking about, in a little bit more in depth than we went into here, some of the structures for how to train, a little bit more nuts and bolts and a little bit less abstract. So we'll be doing that on August 30th. So reach out if you're interested in that as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good times, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Noah.
Later.